This is Dragon Ball Advanced Adventure, one of the best, if not the best, video games on the Game Boy Advance. It's an action platformer that chronicles the adventures of the original Dragon Ball manga. Now, it's no secret that I'm a fan of really hard games with obtuse mechanics that no normal consumer would have a good time with, but I also think there's an art to striking a balance between accessibility and depth. And I think Advanced Adventure does this almost perfectly. It's very easy to complete for the average consumer, the bosses are easily cheesed, the enemies are easily taken over by simply dashing into them and mashing attack, and you do have to pay a modicum of attention if you don't want to die. It's still something anyone could easily finish if they're familiar with games. And the simplicity of the game may grate on said normal consumers if the game were overly repetitious, but thankfully the game introduces variety in spades. There are two separate main gameplay modes, a fighting style gameplay mode with very simple mechanics when you go to a world tournament match or fight an important boss. And then there's the main platforming mode where you jump and bash your way through around a dozen different really small stages and fight over 20 bosses along the way that are quick, easy to fight, and have really cute and fun gimmicks. In addition to the constant change in scenery, the game also introduces new mechanics slowly as the game progresses, giving you more powerful projectile attacks, ultimately ending in the famous Kamehameha wave. Even though there's nothing particularly remarkable about the enemy types or upgrades or the various gameplay modes, they all come in such rapid succession that it's very difficult to get bored of them, and it helps that the game looks and sounds gorgeous. You can easily brute force your way through the entire game if you're not in the mindset to be strategic, and I think that's fine in a game that's so focused on variety and is so short that it's likely to entertain just about anyone. There are so many bosses, so many different stage types, a couple different game modes, and so many different enemies, and just so many colorful explosions, it's hard to get bored. The game's simplicity, variety, and short length also means that it's really easy and fun to replay, and you'll get better at the game each time and discover more about it on each playthrough. For example, while you can make your way through the basic game just mashing attack, if you play the game multiple times you're likely to notice some of the more advanced strategies, such as the increased movement capabilities in your downward kick, the ability to deflect projectiles with your pull by pressing up and B, the ability to grapple and slam enemies if you stand directly inside of their hitbox, the ability to stun enemies in the air by pressing up and B while attacking in the air instead of just B, and a ton of other slight nuances to the combat system that aren't necessary and you may not notice are there if you're just playing casually, but will definitely become apparent the more you play the game, opening it to a lot more depth. It's the ideal game to play over and over and casually speedrun because each time you play the game you get a little bit better at predicting the enemy type's simplistic movements, countering them with your new advanced techniques, and progressing through the stages faster and faster with a kind of deliberate rhythm. And unlike most 2D platformers where the games are just plain unfair and the memorization of the nuanced mechanics is necessary to proceed, this is a game where the nuances just make repeat playthroughs more fun. And after you discover all the nuances of Goku's movement, of which there are actually quite a few, you may notice there's a second playable character for the story mode in Krillin, who behaves entirely differently in combat. He doesn't have the power pull, but he can double jump, is much better at aerial movement, and has a whole bunch of new nuances to discover. It's a simple game with a simple button layout that almost anyone familiar with 2D platformers can play and beat, but the more time you spend with it, the more it opens up, and you can utterly thrash the game in new and fun ways. It's hard to think of someone I wouldn't recommend this game to, assuming they're a fan of 2D platformers or action games. It's the best of both worlds. There's enough advanced depth and strategy here if you plan to look for it, but it's also an easy peasy cakewalk. I've played the game well over 10 times, I love it, and it's definitely one of the best things to happen to the Game Boy Advance system, especially later in its lifespan.